In this video, we're going to talk about how different substances get moved around inside of an organism, particularly inside of an animal or a human. We call this transport. So when things are getting moved around, that's transportation. So we're going to be talking about transportation in the body, especially in humans, but also applies to other animals. So this lesson is going to mostly focus on the blood. But before we do that, I want you to have a quick go at some of these questions here. These questions will be basic retrieval questions. They're called prerequisite questions because to me, these are important things that we need to make sure that you remember before we do today's content. Otherwise, today's content is not really going to make as much sense to you. So what I would like you to do, please, is I would like you to pause the video now and have a go at these questions. Playing the video again if you've had a go at these questions and you've really tried your best to remember the answers to them. Okay. All right. So first of all, what you should have said, what is a cell? We learned in first year that cells are the building blocks of living things, or what we call the basic building blocks of living things. In other words, they make up all living things. So everything that's alive is made of cells. Second question, what is a tissue? This relates to cells. Okay, so tissues are something to do with cells. They're not like tissue that you wipe your nose with or anything like that. So if you didn't understand or you didn't remember, a tissue is something to do with cells, then you have another opportunity to pause the video now and see, can you write down what a tissue is? All right, well, a tissue is a layer of cells or a group of cells that are together in a layer or in one place, and they're working together to do a similar job. Now, one cell on its own isn't much use at anything. For example, muscle. If you wanted to move your body, one cell is not going to be any good for that. You need many, many cells arranged in layers to create what we call muscle tissue. And that muscle tissue then is able to make the bone move when there's lots of them working together in a group. So a tissue is a group of cells that work together. Next one, in respiration, glucose combines with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released. Write a word equation for respiration. Well, this shouldn't be too difficult because I have given you the substances involved. So if you didn't kind of realize this, I'm going to highlight the substances: glucose, oxygen, carbon dioxide, water. Energy is not a substance, so I would not put this in the word equation. Okay, so I want you to pause the video now and have a go at this if you haven't already tried it properly. What you should have done here is you should have written glucose plus oxygen. That's what it tells us in the sentence. It says they react to make or to produce. So the arrow shows that they turn into these are the two things: carbon dioxide plus water. If you like, some people do this. They show that energy is released or given out. Energy. It's a good idea to show that this is given out, but it does not belong in the line of words because these are only chemicals that we put in here, and energy is not a chemical or a substance. All right. Next one, it says label the reactants and the products in respiration. So if you didn't have this all right already, you're going to take down the word equation and label the reactants and the products. Do that now. Okay, so hopefully you said that everything on the left of the arrow, so these things over here, we call these the reactants. These are the things that react. Reactants, they're there at the start. And then these guys here, carbon dioxide plus water, these are the things produced at the end. So these things are products. Well done, if you got that right. On to the next one. Which type of cells do respiration? That was a little bit of a trick question because the answer is all cells. All cells do respiration because all cells have mitochondria, which is the next bit. Where does glucose? Oh, sorry, no, it's not. Mitochondria are the organelles, the parts inside the cell where this happens, and any cell that's got mitochondria are going to do respiration. And all cells really need. There are a few exceptions which we won't go into, but for the most part, all cells need to do respiration because all cells need energy. Next bit, question 6. Where does the glucose used in respiration come from? So here we see that glucose is a requirement for respiration. Where would that come from? Okay, so it's from another organ system that we learned about last year. If you weren't thinking in terms of those lines, I want you to pause the video now and think and see if you can write down an answer. It comes from a different system. What would that system be? Okay, so you should only be playing again if you've tried and thought very hard and you've written down an answer here. Okay, so the glucose used in respiration comes from the digestive system, or in particular, we say it comes from the digestion of food. So when food is digested, we break down the food and we use the glucose for respiration. That's it, guys. All right, so those were really important questions to lead us into today. So onto the idea where we're talking about transport. Now, many organisms, they need a liquid inside them that's able to flow around and carry substances around. This is the only real way that substances can get around inside the body. They need a liquid to carry them around. We call this liquid, the screen back, we call this liquid blood. Okay, so blood is a liquid which carries substances around. Now, blood has four main components, or four main parts that make it up. The first and most important part of the blood, probably, well, I don't know if it's the most important, I don't know if that's fair, they're probably all really, really important. I'm actually going to draw this arrow a little bit longer so that the stuff is well spread out. Okay, so the first part we're going to talk about is something called a red blood cell. So it's a type of cell. Okay, and we're going to come back to that and discuss it in detail in a while, but we're just going to clarify all the different parts that make up the blood first. The second part of the blood is another cell. It's not red, it's called a white blood cell. Now, before we go any further, I just want to focus on these two things. These two things are types of cells, and they're in the same thing or the same area working together to do a job, the job of the blood. That means that we can call the blood a tissue because it's made of different types of cells working together. Tissue. Group of cells working together. So blood is actually a tissue. Now, most tissues in the body we don't really associate with being liquids. We associate them with being solids like muscle or lung or brain. But this just shows you that blood can, tissues can actually be liquids as well. So red blood cell, white blood cell, working together, that means this is a tissue. There are two more parts of the blood. One other of them is called a platelet. We have platelets. Again, we'll discuss these things in more detail later on. And the last component of blood is called the plasma. I'm going to start off with plasma because plasma probably is, it's important we understand plasma so we understand why blood is the way it is. Plasma is the fluid part of the blood. It's basically the liquid that these other three things and some other stuff floats in or flows in, if you like. So the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets are carried around in this liquid called the plasma. So we say that the plasma is a fluid. It's a fluid that carries cells. Now it carries cells, but it also carries the platelets. What other things does it carry? It carries the products of digestion. I want you to think back to what are some of the products of digestion. I want you to pause the video and I want you to speak out loud. What are the products of digestion? Okay, so only if you're playing, if you've had to think about this, okay, if you weren't able to think about this, I'll get you to break it down more. What is the product? What do we break down proteins into? Okay, you should have been saying amino acids. Okay, we learned that last year. Proteins break down into amino acids, which we then build up to make the structures of our body. We also, what is the product of digestion of carbohydrates? What do we break those into? Pause the video and write it down. Let's speak it out, sorry. All right, so we break down carbohydrates and we release glucose. And that's probably the most important thing when we're talking about the blood. Glucose needs to be carried around to all the cells so they can do this process. So all the cells want to do respiration and they need a delivery. This has to be delivered to cells. By the way, oxygen is also required and it also has to be delivered to each cell. Without the delivery, the cells will run out of these materials, glucose and oxygen, and they won't be able to do respiration. So that's the whole point of the plasma and the rest of the blood is to carry those substances to each cell in the body. So it carries cells and it carries products of digestion. So glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, these things float around in the blood. It also carries and removes wastes away from the cells. Carries wastes, e.g. CO2. So CO2, as you can see, carbon dioxide, is produced as a product of respiration. If it's never removed, it's going to build up and it's going to become toxic. So as respiration happens, carbon dioxide is produced, it needs to be taken away from every cell. And the way it does this is it dissolves into the plasma, and the plasma carries it away from the cells. So plasma, a very important part of the blood, is the fluid that carries all the other parts. It carries the cells, but it also carries the things that you eat, the digested food, and it also carries wastes away from cells so they don't become toxic. All right, let's look in more detail at the other little components here. First of all, let's focus on the red blood cell. The red blood cell has a shape kind of like this. I'm going to draw it in two ways. First of all, I'm going to draw it as if we're looking at one from the side. It's kind of like a disc shape, but it caves in on the bottom and it caves in on the top. Okay, so you see where it caves in on the bottom and the top. Okay, this here we call a bi, meaning two, concave shape. That's more a word to worry about for leaving cell. I just wanted to make you aware of what it's called. This is just describing the shape of the cell. Bi meaning two, and cave meaning it kind of caves in. Okay. Now I'm going to draw as if we're looking down from the top. So looking down here like that. Okay. So I'm going to draw that underneath here. So it kind of then just looks like a donut from on top. Okay, where you've got the edge, and then this here is where it dips down in the middle. Now we know it doesn't fully go through like a donut, but it does dip right down into the middle. Okay, so the first thing to note is, how is this cell specially designed for its job? Well, what its job is to carry a substance. What substance does it carry? It carries a substance called oxygen, or O2. So O2 enters into the red blood cell, O2. Okay, so this cell's job is to carry the oxygen. So if we go back to respiration again and keep the big picture in mind, the oxygen that we need for respiration has to get delivered to every cell, but it's the red blood cells in the blood that carry this around. And where do they get it? They get it at the lungs. This is where they collect the oxygen, and then they bring it around to the rest of the body. So what makes the red blood cells good at carrying oxygen? Well, the first thing to know is that they don't have a nucleus. No nucleus. So these are a type of cell that have no nucleus. That means they've got no DNA inside, they've got no chromosomes inside, because they just don't have a nucleus. Why? Well, the nucleus would take up a lot of the space inside the cell. So having no nucleus means that there's more space for oxygen. This maximizes the amount of oxygen that a red blood cell can carry. It doesn't really need a nucleus because it's not taking part in reproduction or anything like that. So it doesn't need really a nucleus with DNA. It just has a very specific job, and that is to carry this oxygen around. That's the first way it's designed for its job. How does oxygen get into the cell? Well, oxygen is normally outside the cell in the lungs, and it spreads into the cell, where there's a lot of it in the lung, and there's less of it in the red blood cell. We say that oxygen is moving from where there's an area where there's a high concentration to an area where there's a low concentration. We learned about this process before. It's called diffusion. Diffusion is how substances move from where there's a high concentration of that substance to where there's a low concentration of that substance. So oxygen enters cells by diffusion. But once it's in there, what's to keep it there? Well, when it goes in, your little molecule of oxygen, these little two purple circles, sticks to something inside. And that's something that grabs onto the oxygen and holds it. That something is a protein. There's many, many copies of that protein inside the cell that grab and hold on to oxygen. We can see here that the oxygen keeps sticking to this protein inside the cell. So the protein grabs the oxygen, holds onto it while it carries it around the body. This protein has a funny name. It's called H-A-E, hemoglobin. Hemoglobin. All right, so this is a protein that carries oxygen. So we say it holds, carries oxygen. The red blood cell is very specially adapted to its job. It's the only type of cell that could carry oxygen. No other type of cell could do this because they don't have the special features required to do this. So these two things in purple are called adaptations. Adaptations, kind of like what we learned in ecology, where organisms are specially adapted to their function or to where they live, to their environment. Well, red blood cells are specially adapted to what their job is or their environment, what they have to do. By having no nucleus, they have more space for oxygen. By having no hemoglobin, by having lots of hemoglobin, they can hold and carry lots of oxygen. That's the red blood cell for you. Okay, it's important that you pay attention because you're going to be asked to summarize this later on. Okay. All right. Let's now move on and look at the other type of cell here, the white blood cell. Sorry, I'll find this again, the white blood cell. And the white blood cell is a bit more, I suppose, straightforward. I'm just going to draw here a cell. This is a cell that does have a nucleus. So it definitely does have a nucleus. And what it does is it's part of the immune system, which means its job is to keep the body healthy. And what do I mean by that? Well, regularly we are attacked by things like bacteria and other microorganisms that try to make us sick. And the white blood cell's job, as being part of the immune system, is to find and kill or attack microorganisms, keep us safe. So the white blood cell defends the body against infections. So it fights infections, forms part of the immune system. So hopefully that bit's a little bit easier to understand. We're not going to go into detail about how a white blood cell does that because it's quite complicated and it's way beyond what we need at this level. Just know that white blood cells fight bacteria, they fight infections, things that make you sick. So when you get a flu, you have a microorganism inside you that's making you sick. And as you get better, your white blood cells are learning to fight that microorganism, and eventually they get the better of it and you get better. Okay, so that's the basics of what's going on there. All right, so white blood cells, very important to keep you healthy. The last bit that we're going to talk about are platelets. Platelets are not cells, rather they are just little fragments of cells. So it's like a cell was broken into loads of little pieces. Especially, it's like a white blood cell. Take a white blood cell, the green thing here, and break it into lots of little pieces, little fragments. That's what platelets are, okay? So the small fragments, they do not have a nucleus. They're too small to have a nucleus. And what they do, or what their job is they're involved when you get an injury. So say here that this is your arm. This is a hand. Really bad hand, but it doesn't really matter. And let's say, for argument's sake, that you get a little cut on your arm. So here I'm opening a little wound and the blood flows out of the arm and onto the surface. Okay. So it's flowing out of the body. What happens here is as the blood flows, some platelets come. So platelets come, and what they do is they kind of form a barrier at the place where there's a cut. And then these fibers start to form, and lots of white and red blood cells get trapped in these fibers, and this forms what we call a scab. And the scab protects and stops the bleeding. So we say that the scab clots the blood. So clots the blood, helps it form into like a collection that plugs the little wound, if you like. So clots the blood and stops the bleeding and allows the skin to regrow and the body to heal. So that's the job of platelets. They do not have a nucleus. Where a cut or a wound occurs, platelets help to form a scab, and this protects the new skin as it grows. and that heals the body. So platelets, very important in healing the body. Okay, so just going to zoom out again so you can have a quick look at the whole lot. What's the big picture? The big picture is that respiration is required for energy. The second big picture is that materials need to be then transported to every cell so they can do respiration, and they also need to be transported away from the cell so we can take away the wastes. We want to get rid of those. So the blood is the fluid or the liquid that allows this to happen. Main part is the plasma, it's the fluid that carries all the rest of the stuff. It carries the cells, the platelets, it carries products of digestion like glucose, and it gets waste away from the cells. Focusing on the three cell parts, we have the red blood cell, the white blood cell, and platelets, and we've gone over in detail the function of those things. The big picture here, the red blood cells carry oxygen, the white blood cells fight infection, and the platelets help to heal cuts, or what we call they clot the blood. All right, so it's your turn to do some practice on this stuff now. The first thing I would like you to do is I would like you to complete the diagram below to summarize the constituents of blood. And let me show you what this means. Plasma is kind of in a box that surrounds everything else. And that gives you the idea of what plasma does. Plasma, again, if you can explain what it actually is here, so a few sentences, a few bullet points about what it is and what it does, that would be good. So let's do the plasma first of all. Let's do a few bullet points on plasma. Pause the video and do that now. Okay, so hopefully you said something to do with it's a fluid. That's the type of thing it is. It's a fluid. Hopefully you said it carries these three things: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Underneath that, what else does it carry? And underneath that, what else does it carry? Okay. All right, so just to recap, the first thing it carries is it carries the cells. And I mean these three types of things: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. The second thing it does is it carries products of digestion. So example, glucose carries glucose. Now, it's not the only thing. It carries other products of digestion too, like amino acids and fatty acids. So products of digestion is probably better, but I do want you to know that glucose is one of them. It also carries wastes, e.g. CO2. Okay, so all that detail is important. Right, let's now move on to the red blood cells. You should have the format the same as this, by the way, guys, I think. Okay, I like this format, the way plasma is in a box around all the other ones. I like that. You should do it the same if possible to show that the plasma contains all these things. Right, red blood cells, what do they do? What do you know about them? Pause the video, write down some bullet points. If you can, draw the structure. Okay, all right, just let you self-correct that there. Here's the detail on the red blood cell. Check it, make sure you've discussed the main points. Use the diagrams if you need to. Hopefully you knew a lot of this stuff already and you're not copying, because copying isn't good. If we're just looking at this and fixing it, that's fine. But if we're copying it, then that's just not, we're not learning as much. Right, on to the white blood cells. Let's do the white blood cell now. Do that now. And let's do platelets. Diagrams if you can. Okay, and we are going to have a look at the details of white blood cells and platelets. There you go. Okay, probably need a bullet point that clarifies what white blood cells do. They help the body by fight infection. Infection we can call as anything where a microorganism tries to make you sick, like a bacteria or a fungus or a virus. Those are infections. Okay, all right, and hopefully you are happy enough with what you've done there now. All right, so we have another set of questions for you guys to practice. So I want you to pause the video and work on questions 8 down to 17. All right, most of that should be pretty easy. I think I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to pick out a couple of the ones that I think are harder. Number 11, what is the job of hemoglobin? The job of hemoglobin, well, it's this thing up here. It's the purple thing that, oh, sorry, it's the pink thing that was trapping the oxygen. So its job is to hold and carry oxygen. All right, that's a simple way of describing it. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for now, that will do fine. So it holds and carries oxygen. Number 12, what is two adaptations of red blood cells? I would say they have no nucleus and they They have no nucleus and they contain hemoglobin. 15 might be tricky. What type of cells contain 0 chromosomes? How do you know? Okay, that would be the red blood cell. They don't have any chromosomes. And how do you know? Well, they don't have any nucleus. So they don't have any nucleus, no DNA, no chromosomes. Okay. Next one that might be difficult is number 17. The student says platelets are not cells, therefore we can live without them. Explain how this is wrong. Okay, so it's correct in that they're not cells. That's true. Okay, so that's not wrong. The bit that is wrong is the idea that we can live without them. We can't really live properly without them without getting like some kind of medical help where they give us platelets or something. So if we get a doctor, if you don't have any of your own platelets, they will have to give you platelets. And the reason for this is if we get a cut, a wound, it will not heal. So even a small cut would lead to you bleeding out, because if you didn't treat it, it will just keep bleeding and bleeding and bleeding and bleeding because you don't have any ability to heal the wound, to form a scab and stop the bleeding. Okay, so let's get back down to the question and what a good answer looks like. A student says platelets are not cells, therefore we cannot live without them. This is wrong because, this is wrong because we could not live without them. This is because if we got a cut, it would not heal. It would continue to bleed and you would lose too much blood and die. Okay, that's basically it. Now, I don't want you to use an exact sentence I've said there, but I want you to put that into your own sentence if you weren't already thinking about that. So yes, they're not full cells, that's true, but we can't live without them because we would have no ability to heal wounds and we will keep bleeding and we would die. All right. All right, guys, that is it on the blood. That's what we need to know. I'll leave this diagram here at the end if anyone wants to see it or make a copy of it. I don't like people copying things, as you know, at this stage. But if you really want to have a backup copy of that, it's there. And I'll leave it there at the end. You can pause and take it down or whatever. All right, guys, thank you. I'll see you in the next video.